think that I should give you a little bit of background information. My mother and father split up when I was 2, so wanting another man in her life, she found a new boyfriend. He wasn't what you would call a nice person. He was very abusive. One night, he stole $100 from me and my mom, and we decided that was the last straw. She called the police, and he was sent to jail. He always told us that there was a male ghost that followed him around, but no one ever believed him. As time passed, while he was in jail, our belief in his ghost grew. I was now about 8 years old, and I can remember these days like they were yesterday. Every day, when my mom and I got home, the cat scratcher, it was one of those really tall ones, was in the middle of our dining room floor. This was eerie for several reasons. The first being that our cat was not large enough to even move the object. The second was that the cat hated the toy. And the third and most important was that the cat scratcher was put at the bottom of our stairway, which was 3 rooms away. I was now afraid to go anywhere in the house by myself, so wherever my mom was, so was I. One night, my 14-year-old cousin decided to spend the night. My mom didn't want to scare her, so she didn't tell her anything about her recent happenings. I let her have my room, and I slept in the bed with my mom. About 10 minutes after she was in the room by herself, she ran into the room that my mother and I were in, screaming. She claimed that she saw an old man playing with the chain that hung from the light. My mom went in my room to see if anything was there. There was no man, but the chain was still fiercely spinning. It then started to slow until it stopped. When we entered the house about a week later, the cat scratcher wasn't in the dining room, but it also wasn't in the stairway. We proceeded up the stairs. My mom was ahead of me, and I was quivering behind her. As my mom flicked on the hallway light, she jumped. After I questioned her about what it was, I noticed it without her answer. Greasy handprints slid across the top of our 10-foot wall. For some strange reason, my mom followed them. Too afraid to be left by myself, I followed her. At this point, my heartbeat shook my entire body. We were now approaching her bedroom. Sure enough, there was the cat scratcher, next to it, an enormous handprint. And when I say enormous, I mean enormous. It appeared to be a foot in length. My mom tried to clean it up on countless occasions, but it was never lifted. Until her boyfriend was released from jail, that is. He was immediately kicked out, and everything stopped happening. The whole thing was just kind of strange to me, because the next time my mom tried to clean up the stain, it disappeared, and nothing happened again. I swear to you this is true, but you don't have to take my word for it. This story is for you to believe, or not. The story is about my grandma Ruth, that passed away in 2002. I loved her so much. Things have been happening, up until this day, ever since she passed. The strange occurrences that happened to me was that at the time, I was living in Portsmouth, Virginia, with my father. My grandma said that I could have her bed when she passed, so now I have it. This happened on a Sunday. Me and my other grandma was going to church, but at the last minute, decided not to go. I went back in my room and lay down on my grandma's bed. That's when I thought I heard someone call my name. I knew it sounded like my grandma, but I dismissed it kind of. When I didn't respond to her calling me, I heard her calling me again. That's when I looked up, and she was sitting at the foot of my bed, dressed like she would always be, not how she was at the funeral. Now, this part I don't understand why she said this. She asked if she wanted to fix me something to eat. I was so startled, I screamed, and started to kick my feet like a child that was having a tantrum. With me doing that, she just started to fade off and disappeared. A lot of things happened to my mom, but she will have to write up here for herself. Other things that have happened to me. When I was about 10 years old, One night, I wasn't feeling good, and I was laying in bed. I went to sleep, but when I woke up, I felt someone tucking me in. I thought it was my mom, so I turned over to see her, but it wasn't her. I just saw this large dark shadow at the end of my bed. I was so scared and just put the covers over my head. Now, this next thing that happened to me, I've been looking on all sorts of sites to see if anyone has ever had this happen to them. Whoever reads this, if this has happened to you, or you know someone that it did happen to, would you write it down into the site? I would gladly appreciate it. Here goes. When I was 7 or 8, I was in bed at night, and all of a sudden, I felt like someone was in bed with me. I turned to my side, and I saw this man that looked like a troll. He had no color to him. He was just straight white. He was so scary to look at that I turned away and just stayed in bed. I was terrified to move. I didn't go to sleep. I could still feel him near. When light came into my room, from it being morning, I got the courage to look back to see if he was still in the bed, and he was gone. What was that? Growing up after that incident always had me putting teddy bears in the bed with me so that he wouldn't come back. But as I got a little bit older, I got braver, and I said to myself that if he ever did come back, I was going to get him. Hasn't come back. I'm 19 now. Well, that's all I want to write right now. Thank you for reading. I would like you to hear about my horrible encounter with a ghost, or unseen being. We're on vacation in Oklahoma, visiting some relatives that I'd never met before. They lived in a thickly wooded area. That evening after supper, and the sun had started settling, my mother and I decided to go for a walk and enjoy the beautiful new scenery we were in. We had been hiking for 20 to 30 minutes, so we were several miles from the house. Suddenly, a breeze swept over us, and before us was a small pond. I looked over into the water and saw a bright face staring back at me. I know that it was not my reflection. I jumped back and turned around, and my mother was nowhere around. I began yelling and calling out to my mother, but got no response. I finally got back to my relative's house and ran in. I asked everyone if they had seen my mother, and no one said they had seen her. This alerted my relatives because they had 100 acres of wooded area, and there were snakes and other dangerous animals, and the sun had already set. Me, my uncle and his wife, and 2 of my older cousins headed into the dark woods, all carrying flashlights. We walked towards the pond and hoped she'd still be nearby. I looked up, and behind 2 trees was a bright shining light. I walked towards the light and looked behind the tree. There was the same person I had seen in the water, but he wasn't easy to see. It was almost like you could see right through him. I freaked out and screamed, yelling for my relatives to come see. When they arrived, they stopped and watched the ghost float away over the water and into the darkness. Everyone stood in shock of what they saw. After several hours, the woods became draped with heavy fog. We could hardly see what was in front of us. We decided to head back towards the house and call for help. We called the sheriff, and he arrived with 3 other police. All night long, we spent looking and scanning the dark pond water. No sign of my mother. I was so worried. Oddly, no one mentioned to the police what we had seen earlier. I didn't know whether or not to say anything. I did not want to seem crazy to the police, but I wanted to do anything to find my mother. I asked my older cousin Charles if we should say anything about the sighting. He shook his head and said, "Come on, we didn't see anything. That was probably a firefly." I was totally confused. I knew I'd seen a person's face in the water, and then again behind the trees. I knew that everyone else had seen it too. I finally said, "Sheriff, I think there is someone or something in these woods." Then he asked me to explain what I'd seen. At sunrise, The family decided to go back to the house and let the police continue their search. I was hesitant, but my family talked me into coming home with them. We walked into the house, and I sat down at the table. My aunt made me hot chocolate and asked me if I was alright. I couldn't believe what I had seen, and everyone else had seen, and no one was talking about it. I was confused and started hoping that this was all a nightmare. I drew myself a bath and climbed in. I cleared the vapor off the window and just stared. I didn't even know what to do. I wanted to feel hopeful, but the demonic stare of the ghost haunted me. I didn't have a good feeling. I kept imagining horrible things happening to my mother. I cried and rubbed water over my face. I prayed that God would help us find her. Several days has passed, and no sign of my mother. A missing persons report was made. I was starting to lose all hope. I felt like I had lost the most important person in my life. I wanted to go look for her myself, but the police refused to let anyone else into the woods. Late that night, I heard some footsteps. It kept coming closer. And then I saw a bright light at my door. The door slowly opened, and the same face was standing there. It scared me, and I screamed. It came at me fast and suddenly, and I felt a burning sensation over my body. Then it felt wet. I couldn't breathe. My throat felt like it was closing. I woke up in a hospital bed. My aunt was asleep in the chair next to me. I looked up at the end of the bed. I was so confused. I couldn't remember how I got there. My aunt awoke and told me that I passed out the night before and they couldn't wake me. They said I had bruises all over my body and hand marks on my throat, like I had been strangled. Oh my God, it was the ghost from the pond. My aunt looked at me strangely, then ran to hit the nurse button. She looked down at me and said, "Honey, you have been through a lot of stress. You need to relax. We found your mother. She can't remember anything, but we found her lying next to you. She's here in the hospital too, only 3 rooms away." What? I want to see her now. I got up and ran to the hall, but was stopped by 2 nurses. "You have to stay in bed, honey," they explained. I sat down and told them that I needed to see her. They began injecting me into the arm with a shot. I started to panic and asked my aunt what was wrong with me. Then I got very dizzy and relaxed. I woke up to a nurse bringing my dinner. She brought 2 sedatives and a glass of water. I asked her where my mother was, and they said the police were investigating her. Then she came into my room and slowly walked over to my bed. She put her hand on top of mine and asked me if I was feeling okay. I asked her if she was okay, and she told me she was fine. She just doesn't remember much. I asked her if she remembers our walk from the night we were out on a walk together. She said she did, but didn't remember what happened to her after that. I asked her if she saw the face in the pond. She said no, nothing at all. Still to this day, no one knows who or what happened the night of my mother's disappearance or her reappearance. No one knows what really happened. No, don't laugh, but I believe that a ghost had taken her. I don't know why or what he did it for. It could have just been an evil ghost causing chaos. Police think there's someone behind it, like a kidnapper. And when he tried to return my mother, he saw me and panicked and tried to even kill me. The police had me describe the man's face that I saw. They have yet to find a person. I wish that I knew what really happened that night. It would answer so many questions for me. I wasn't going to share the story because I didn't think it was an actual ghost story, but I thought about it, and I guess it could be, and if not, it's still kind of a weird and interesting incident. When I graduated high school in 1998, I went up to Ohio to visit a friend who graduated a year ahead of me and went up there to go to college. I graduated on the 6th and left on the 8th and stayed there for 10 days. Well, about 3 nights before I came back, which would have been the night of the 15th, morning of the 16th, I had a dream. In this dream, I woke up in my bed back home, and there was this man sitting on my bed. He had dark brown long hair and was clean shaven, wearing a white robe. I was kind of startled at first, then it turned to curiosity. I asked who he was. He says something like, "You know of me, but don't know me," and then goes on saying how we are alike and that he would be the same, and just a bunch of stuff like that. I was still confused because he never said who he was. He was telling me not to worry, that everything will be okay, and just a bunch of stuff that I couldn't figure out. Well, to make a long story short, I just passed off the dream as a weird dream. That was until I got home. I told my mother about it, and she asked when was the dream, and I told her the night of the 15th. She had this weird look on her face, and then showed me this letter. It was dated June 16th, 1998, and it was a letter she wrote to a brother that was born before me and died after he was born. I knew about him, but never knew the exact details like his birthday. She thinks that it was my older little brother coming to visit me on his birth and death day, and when I heard that, then it all started to make sense. This is my story. After all the stories I read, I wanted to tell my own. It was 1990. We moved from one small town in southeast Kansas to another. To tell you the layout of the house, so you know what I'm talking about, on the front of the house was a large screen and porch. That's where the front door was to the house. When you walked into that door, there were stairs that led up to the second story. That's where my story begins. When we first looked at the house, my sister, who was 2 years older than me, went upstairs to look at the bedrooms where we would sleep. As we walked through the second door, we saw someone go through the wall. That's where it all started. After we moved in, things started to happen. At night, my dad would hear someone open in the front door and walk across the hardwood floor that had carpet on it. He would get up and look. The front door was still deadbolted. I would hear someone walk up and down the stairs all night long. I mainly slept with my sister after that. After about a month, my dad ended up in the hospital, so me and my sister were home alone for a while, without our mother there. That's when strange things really started to happen. The entity would start scaring us. It would knock on the back door, open, and slam the cabinets closed. Walked across the upstairs floor, slamming doors. Our poor dog would not even go upstairs. It would sit at the foot and bark and whine. To make a long story short, after my dad got home from the hospital, the thing tried to smother my mom to death. My mom always slept on her stomach. It was from that moment that we decided to move. Someone bought the house and remodeled it. I wonder if they had the same problem as we did. My sister and her family lives in a place that appears to be built on a graveyard. There are stone markers all over our yard. Yesterday, I was over there and accidentally knocked over a large marker and attempted to write it. I could not budge it to get it back in its place, and yet when I visited today, the stone was more erect and there was no signs that it had ever been otherwise. My sister also spoke of a lady that used to live there in the 1800s. The lady's name was Kathy. Reported to me by my sister, Kathy told her that she was glad to have a family living once more in the house. My mother has reported feeling someone patting her on the back, and no one actually being there. I personally have seen a white form in the house, and a darker gray form, speeding by the window. After bolting the door to the crawlspace to the attic securely, the door opened by itself. That happened just yesterday. My brother-in-law reported that when he went into the attic via the crawlspace in order to access the roofing, he was pushed down and fell out of the attic. About a month ago, while my sister and her husband were asleep in bed, a small air conditioner that was securely bolted into the window was thrown inward into the bedroom floor. My sister has also reported an instance in which Kathy told her of a hanging suicide that occurred in an old barn structure on the property. My sister was also told that there was an evil person buried on the property underneath a tree outside of her bedroom window. These are honest statements made by various people with no mental delusions or anything that will indicate a separation from reality state. You may believe me or not, but the choice is yours. In late December of 2000, my boyfriend Ryan and his best friend Don moved into the house that Don had grown up in. Their apartment was too cramped during their band practices, and Don's father was willing to make the rent very reasonable. The house is down the street from a very large and very old cemetery, and directly across from an old canal. The neighborhood is peaceful and charming most of the time. Before they moved in, they had to fix the house up quite a bit because the last residents had trashed it so badly. They had ripped up the carpet, splattered paint on the walls, and replaced all the blinds with wrapping paper. Naturally, they enlisted my help. As I drove to their new home for the first time, I experienced very unsettling feelings as I drove up and parked. The feelings pervaded the entire time I was in the house. I grew up in a haunted house and have had other experiences with the supernatural, most of them positive. I'm not one to be easily scared by the supernatural, nor do I think that because something frightens me, that is automatically evil. I decided to ignore the feelings because no one else seemed to be bothered. Ryan and Don settled comfortably into their new house, and Don was glad to be back in his childhood home. I became used to the strange sensations I would experience all around the house. Even the overwhelming feeling of being watched when I'd go away in my car ceased to bother me. One night in February, I believe, I was leaving to go back to my house at around 3 a.m. As I fumbled for my keys to unlock my car door, I could feel someone behind me. Suddenly, I heard 3 loud, stomping footsteps. Thinking that it was possibly some live person intending to harm me, I whirled around and screamed as loudly as I could. There was no one there. Ryan, naturally, came running out of the house. I ran onto the porch and into Ryan's arms. I told him what happened and started sobbing uncontrollably. I was no longer frightened, but I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. Whoever that is, I remember saying, is very confused. It's a man, and he needs help. I don't know that he realizes that he is dead. Ryan became very thoughtful for a moment. You know, we are surrounded by a cemetery, and people have drowned in the canal. Someone did just a few years ago, but I don't know who it was. After that, Ryan and I went both back to my place to spend the night. Don had been visiting his mother. The next day, we told Don what happened. He confirmed that someone had drowned in the canal a few years before, but it was a young girl. I immediately ruled out the young girl. I knew this presence was very masculine. Don also remembered that a very nice man who had lived next door had died suddenly of a heart attack when Don was a child. That seemed like a more plausible candidate, but there was the long history of the canal to consider, and the nearby cemetery. Don was dumbfounded by the entire situation. I lived here for the first 15 years of my life, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. He reflected for a moment. Well, there was that one time when I had stayed home from school and felt someone looking at me, so I turned around, and there was my sister. I said, "Hey, Bethany," and then remembered that she had gone to school that morning and wasn't going to be home for about an hour. The apparition disappeared, and at the regular time, she came home. "Well," said Ryan, there was the Fonzie incident too. Fonzie is a very friendly, sweet-tempered cat that belonged to Don. Apparently, when Don and Ryan were working on the house, before they had moved in, The cat was still at their apartment. They had both, on separate occasions, seen Fonzie walking around. I found both the accounts of these rather strange apparitions a bit puzzling. I know that sometimes apparitions of the living are seen, but it is usually when something pivotal is about to happen. Nothing interesting happened before or after these odd apparitions. I thought that perhaps some entity was somehow taking the forms of things that were familiar and loved, so as to let them know of its presence without being threatening. Whatever it was, did not seem to me like it could have been caused by the same melancholy presence I felt. Over the next few months, nothing much happened. I brought 2 friends of mine, both of who've had many experiences with the paranormal, over to the house. One of them didn't get any negative feelings or sad feelings from the area at all. Another, whom I've not told about the strange occurrences, was so put off with the depressed feelings she got that she wanted to leave almost as soon as she arrived. One thing beyond sensing a spirit worth mentioning did occur in those several months. I was asleep on the couch in the living room while Ryan and Don's band practiced. All of a sudden, Kenny, the bass player, came running up the stairs. He woke me up. "Hey, are you alright?" he asked. "Yeah. Why?" I replied sleepily, "Because we were sure we heard someone come in the front door." I told him I hadn't heard anything. He proceeded to check all around the house for the suspected intruder and never found anyone or anything. During the summer months, a few torrential downpours caused Ryan and Don's basement to flood, nearly destroying a significant portion of their band equipment. After that incident, they decided to move, yet again. I was staying at my own place, and Don was visiting his mother again. In the middle of the night, Ryan called me in a panic. "I just had the strangest experience," he told me. "I was asleep on the couch when I was awakened by a baby crying. I sat up and realized that the noise was coming from Don's room. I looked up and stared down the hall. All of a sudden, this white, somewhat blurred figure of a woman came walking out of my room and went into Don's room. Then I heard a woman shushing the baby." Ryan was frightened, but he realized that the strange event was not threatening in any way. We talked about it and agreed that it was most likely some sort of residual haunting. Later, Ryan told Don about the experience and found that Don had witnessed the same event. Ryan and Don had not lived in the house for a few months now. We never figured out exactly who the man outside the house was, or who the woman and the baby were, or what caused the strange apparitions of Bethany and Fonzie. I only wonder if these things still go on in the house, and if the current residents have the powers of observation to notice them. This happened in February 2000, during my junior year of high school. I was in my bed one night, just staring at the ceiling, waiting to fall asleep. That night, for some odd reason, I was lying on the opposite end of the bed. I remember seeing the yellow digital numbers on my TV say 12:40 a.m. I remember this detail because I know for sure that I was not sleeping. I was fully awake and conscious. Suddenly, I felt this eerie chill just start to permeate the room. So cold, so freezing. A wind that was coming from seemingly nowhere because my window was closed tight, as was my door. I had about 3 layers of blankets and sheets on me, but the cold just seemed to be going right under them. Immediately, just every hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. People use the terms chills going down their spines figuratively, but the real thing is not the most pleasant sensation in the world. Then, I heard this male voice, very sinister in tone, start laughing. It just echoed and surrounded me. I was terror-stricken at this point. I could feel my heart beating. I closed my eyes, praying to God frantically that whatever it was would leave. When the voice subsided, the room returned to normal temperature. I just bolted out of my room. I have no idea what it was that visited me that night, but several times after that, when I was in bed, I had this feeling that someone or something intangible was watching me. Since then, I've had several psychic and numerology readings, which indicate that I'm sensitive to the psychic and supernatural. I've had dreams throughout my life, which served as a precursor of good tidings in the future, including my acceptance into the school I am attending today. I am a college freshman. When I visit home, I refuse to sleep without the hall light on. Call me chicken, but I don't think I'm quite ready to encounter what lies in the darkness again. For these purposes, let's just say my name is Amy. Where I come from, ghosts and the supernatural is kind of the way of life for my people. We welcome ghosts to our family members who have passed away with open arms, knowing they are here to watch over us. That's the mentality I've had all my life, but when the reality of it is faced, it's a different story. I have two unbelievable experiences to tell anyone who is interested enough to listen. Bear in mind, this is the first time I've told strangers about this. I should say my first ghost experience was when I lost my mom, when I was 16. My mom was the center of my universe, and when she died unexpectedly during childbirth, it was a shock to me for years to come. I'm 23 now. 2 days after her death, I was sleeping in her bedroom, lying on her side of the bed. I'd been crying myself to sleep, and I had this dream. At least I thought it was a dream, because the way it happened, it was as real as it could be. In my dream, or self-conscious state of mind, I was lying in the same position in which I had fallen asleep when I saw Mom come into the room and just stand there watching me sleep. I opened my eyes in the dream, and she very gently kissed me on the cheek and told me not to cry. I tried to hold on to her so she won't go, but she left with me crying bitterly in my sleep. I woke up immediately after, smelling her perfume very strongly in the room. I knew then without a doubt, my mom visited me to say goodbye. I wasn't afraid, just very sad, because she's gone. My second, and very terrifying ghost experience happened a couple years later when my grandfather became violently ill with severe heart problems. I was never close with my grandfather. I loved him, but he was very strict and unable to show any emotions to anyone, not even my grandma. But we all know he loves us in his own way. The hospital that he was admitted to was a little distance away from the house, so we could actually take food over to him. We all went to visit him several times a day, but he was so sick, he couldn't even talk to us anymore. About a week or so after he's been admitted, the whole family went to the hospital to see him, but I remember staying home alone that day. We have a couch in the living room that sits across from the front door. I was napping on and off when I heard someone opening the front door. Since it was locked, I thought it had to be one of my family coming home. Imagine my surprise when I looked up and saw my grandfather walking in his carrying bag that we used to put his clothes in when we took him to the hospital. I said hi to him, but he didn't answer, just went straight to his room and closed the door. I didn't know what to think at this point, but I remember expecting my family to burst through the door any second, telling me they brought him home because he was feeling better. After about 3 minutes, I could hear him moving about in his room, so I went to knock on the door to ask him if he needed help with something, but no one even answered, though I could hear things moving. It didn't surprise me, because he could never talk much. About 15 minutes later, my aunt burst in the house screaming at the top of her voice that we've lost Grandpa. I thought they meant they lost him when they were coming home, so I told her he's already here, and he's in his room. She looked at me as if I was crazy, and told me that Grandpa died right around the time he walked into the house a while ago. I fainted when she said that, and up to this day, I can't believe that happened to me. I don't know what to make of it, but it sure scared me for a long, long time. We had just gotten done playing video games and decided to go to bed, myself and 3 others. One girl who would be my future goddaughter, her aunt, and their younger friend had enough electronic entertainment for one night. The younger girl had decided to sleep on the couch, leaving the rest of us to sleep on the floor, since there wasn't enough beds in the bedroom to go around. Most everyone was just laying there, staring at something in the dark, or randomly saying something here and there, getting ready to fall asleep. I stared straight at a digital clock. Suddenly, A figure had obstructed my view of the clock for a brief moment. It was then that I said, "Hey guys, did you see that?" Soon after, I heard my goddaughter let out a loud scream. They both claimed to have seen a figure heading towards the kitchen, and we heard a loud clatter of pans hitting the ground. The thing disappeared, and we didn't see it again all night. Neither did my goddaughter. But here's my second story. The week I started college, I noticed a change in my dog. He was acting quite a bit funny, almost sick. Within that week, it was found that he had slipped a disc in his back and was later put to sleep. I was emotionally torn for a while, as I was, and still am, very much attached to that dog. After a few months, I decided that even though I really loved my previous dog, I still did want a companion around, and got the dog I currently have. The morning after we had brought her home, I felt a weight on my chest. It felt like the size of a dog, about the same size as the one I had before. I thought it was the new dog, so I told her to get down. I heard her jump from my chest to the floor. It was then that I realized it wasn't the new dog, because my room's door was shut, and there was no way she could have gotten in here. That, and the fact that she wasn't anywhere around. At first, I was a bit spooked, but then I thought, good, he's still here with me. The summer I turned 18 and headed off to college, my family moved to Martinsville, New Jersey. They built a brand new house on land that was once part of what my grandfather called Indian country. Whenever I would go home for break, I never slept very well in the house. I always had butterflies in my stomach and couldn't pass out until the wee hours of the night when my eyes just couldn't stay open anymore. One day, I was sitting in the family room watching TV. Above the TV there was a 7x8 foot opening into the hallway upstairs. I caught someone out of the corner of my eye walking by that opening and into my sister's bedroom. Immediately I thought it was odd. The only other people who were in the house were my mother and grandfather, both of whom were to the left of me, in the kitchen. When I told them what happened, they just stood there, looking at each other. Finally, my grandmother spoke up. Apparently, both her and my mother had seen a figure walk by the doorways in the house on a number of occasions. According to my grandmother, the lights flickered every once in a while too. She was under the impression the house was haunted. That night, I was lying in bed, reading a book. It was about 4 a.m., and I was the only one up. I decided to brush my teeth before trying to get some sleep. I opened the door to my bedroom and was about to turn left to go to the bathroom when I felt the need to look down the hallway towards my mother's room. My mom usually kept the door closed, but that night, the door was open, and there was a man standing in the opening. He was tall and skinny. The only man that was in the house was my stepfather, and he's short and plump. The figure was just standing there, looking at me. No, watching me. I immediately ran into the bathroom, my heart pounding. About 10 minutes later, I got the nerve to run back to my room and hide under the covers. Needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink. From that night on, I knew that the butterflies in my stomach were because I felt something watching me. Although it frightened me like I've never been frightened before, and even though I still get the shivers thinking about that night, I've always known this ghost was just a watcher. I didn't feel any evil or ill will from him, but I have no idea who he was. Like I said earlier, the land was considered Indian country, i.e., it was wooded, until they cleared it for the new development. So, it's possible the ghost was an American Indian, but for some reason, I feel that isn't right. That this man I saw was in fact white, and possibly a farmer from the early 1900s. Either way, the shadows and flickering of the lights continued until my family moved 3 years later. It's possible they even continue today, but I don't think anyone ever saw the man as clearly as I did that night. Thanks for reading. I've been reading through your website and found it very interesting, but I never thought that I had a story to relay, until I read a story that sounded extremely like something happened to me a few years ago. I live in Toronto, Canada, and in 1991, my third child was just a baby, and would wake up nightly around 2 a.m. for feeding. At the time, we lived in a condo, which we had lived in since 1988. We had some minor incidents, like things moving around, and shadows seen out of the corner of one's eye, but nothing to speak of really. Just things that could be chalked up to imagination. On one particular night, my son wakened for his feeding. I sat in my rocking chair in the baby's room, feeding him. The nightlight was on, and I was wide awake, when all of a sudden, I heard what sounded like a lion roar or a tiger roar, loud and clear. I jumped up, turned on all the lights in the house, and was convinced that a tiger was in the closet. Woke up my husband and had him search through the entire apartment, including the balcony, which was 6 stories up. Of course, it would have been impossible for an animal to have gone into the apartment, but the roar had sounded so real, I had to be sure. After that, I tried to convince myself that it was my imagination, but I never forgot about it. I wonder if you know what this could be, and if there's any explanation for it. This just happened the night before last. For the past 3 days, my husband, my 2 little girls of preschool age, my mother-in-law and I had been camping at beachside campgrounds in Oregon, a beautiful place caught between Highway 101 and the beach itself, just north of Yahutz. Anyway, that night was our last night there, and somewhere in the middle of sleeping, my youngest daughter woke up crying, saying that she was scared. Not overly unusual for a preschooler, but after I tucked her back in, she dropped right back into a deep sleep, which for her is very unusual. She usually likes to snuggle and talk, and generally keep me up as long as she can. As I was trying to get back to sleep myself, I heard what I thought was my older daughter saying, "Mommy, Mommy." I answered her, but had no response. I heard the voice again, this time more insistent, "Mommy, Mommy," though always at a kind of a whisper. I got up and physically looked at my 2 girls, who were completely sound asleep, the kind of sleep that is past dreaming, which was very odd because, you remember, my youngest one had just woken up a short while before. Then, as I laid down for a second time, I heard the voice again, only it seemed to come from all the way around me and in a constant stream. "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy," and it wouldn't stop. It just kind of kept reverberating around my head and seemed to have no specific point of origin. My husband got up, not hearing a thing, mind you, to relieve himself, and came back a few moments later. While he was gone, I said out loud, "Whoever you are, go away. We're trying to sleep." And the voice kind of faded away, but always saying "Mommy." I'd asked my husband if he'd heard or seen anything outside the tent when he was out there, but he said he hadn't. This gave me the creeps in a serious way. The voice didn't come back, and we were leaving the next morning anyway. That was yesterday. I told everyone about the voice the next morning, and they looked at me as if I had lobsters crawling out of my ears. But I still wonder if something happened at the campsite. I feel it was a small child who had gotten lost and never found its way back to its tent, and I feel it was a small boy, but I know nothing for certain. If anybody knows about any ghostly happenings at the beachside campgrounds in Oregon State, I'd surely like to hear back from you. I'm not quite sure where to start this story, but I'll try it this way. I'm able to feel the energy around me. I've always felt weird things, but for the last 10 years of my life, my abilities have increased. I was standing in the garage in the daytime, getting ready to leave for work. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man in a black and white suit. He was very tall, about 6'2", and his clothes were old-fashioned. He reminded me of an old Western mortician. His hat was a black hat. I blinked my eyes to see if he would go away, but he just stood there. He reminded me of death. His form was solid, but yet not really. He was not transparent like the others I had seen. I put my purse in the car, and when I looked back, he was gone. I didn't get too close to him because I was terrified. But when I went to my Tai Chi class, I asked my Saifu about him. He asked, "Did you ask him what he wanted?" I said no, because I thought he was deaf. I was not about to invite death into my house. A few months went by, and I was in the kitchen doing the dishes when a shadow went by the window. I thought it was Ted from next door for a moment, because he is tall. I thought I would greet him at the front door. Well, there was no one there, so I said out loud, "Very funny." The next day, I was in the garage going to work. Again, the man in the driveway. This time, I was sort of brave and stepped closer. I could not feel anything from him except a low vibration on the cool side. It was so weird, so I said, "How can I help you?" He just tipped his hat and then disappeared. When I went home for vacation, I'm from Indiana. My sister and I were going through my aunt's pictures. She has since passed away. She was 85. I came across this picture. All the hair on my neck stood up, and I got the willies. My sister looked at me and said, "Oh, is that your great-great-grandfather McNeely? He was a Quaker and he shoed horses. Since I have found out who he has never come back." I was wondering, since he was solid, so to speak, could he have been out of place in time, more than appearing as a ghost? Thanks for letting me share this story. My friends think I'm weird. I see and sense stuff. There's no way you can convince people of what you see. I don't even try anymore. When I see the ghost in the casino, for example, I just smile and keep on walking. I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. Hi, this is a great site. I'd like to share my experiences of the paranormal with you. I've written them in before, and someone wrote back, telling me that it was possible that there could be explanation for what occurred. Right now I'm 18, but I remember the events as if they happened yesterday. I've only ever had to move house once, which was nearly 2 years ago. My parents and I used to live in East Anglia, UK, which has its fair share of haunted old homes, but all that is totally unrelated. We had a semi-detached house. My dad told me I was about 30 years old. I always remember the evil presence in the house, although I didn't notice it much back then. First experience I had was when I was about 6, and it was late one night, after my parents had gone to sleep. Our neighbors were away on holiday at the time. I had the smallest room, which was situated above the garage and the stairwell. I was just falling asleep when I heard a loud knocking noise, like someone rapping against a wall, and it was a rhythmic rapping. I ignored it, or at least tried to at first, but then a few seconds later, I heard it again. It was coming from downstairs, and every time it happened, it seemed to be moving up the stairs and eventually onto the landing. By this time, I was creeped out and turned my lamp on, which flickered weirdly. Eventually the knocking was right inside my room, in the far corner, and I was surprised my mom or dad didn't hear it. I called out a few times for my mom, because I was too scared to get out of bed, and she came in. I asked her to stay with me and hear the noise for herself. She waited with me and heard it too, but naturally, she didn't believe me and told me it was probably the heating. Why would the heating make noises, which sounded as though they were coming from downstairs, into my room? Another incident happened just after one of my brothers left for university. He was the last one to go. I was about 10 when this happened, and I'd swapped rooms with him anyway, so I was now in the back room and was a lot bigger than the one I had before. This incident terrified me the most, and I'll never forget it. I used to sleep with my feet out, the blanket at the bottom of the bed, obviously. and I woke up after feeling cold fingers on my foot. Waking up groggily, I looked down to the end of my bed and was surprised to see a black shadow in the shape of a human figure. It was looking right my way. I could tell it didn't have any eyes or any human features, and eventually it turned swiftly and quietly left the room. My bedroom door had been shut, and it left my room without the door opening. You can understand now why I sleep with the covers right over my feet. I've had plenty more freaky experiences. They happened on school trips, and on 2 occasions, we stayed in very old, possibly haunted locations. I'll write them in another time. All that I've told you now is all very true. I wish I had looked into the history of our previous house, and I know before it was built, there was just old farmland. And other times, especially when I was alone, I got the feeling I wasn't exactly all alone, if you get what I mean. The presence didn't seem very friendly in itself. This happened about 4 years ago, while I was a senior in high school. A bunch of friends and I were looking for something to do, and ended up riding out to a very old cemetery in the rural area of our small town. The story goes that there was a young boy who was buried there decades ago, and he has often been seen playing on the grounds. We, being arrogant kids, did not believe a word of it, and just parked the car at the cemetery and stood around talking. Pretty soon, the 5 of us started to wander from tombstone to tombstone, reading the names of those buried. I walked over to one that was under a small tree. I was busy reading it, and someone walked up beside me. I was sure it was my cousin, and did not even look at him. I just said, "Did you see this one, Robbie?" Just then, my cousin Robbie said, "Are you talking to me?" He was standing several yards away at the parked car. I could tell in my peripheral vision that the figure on my left was still there. I did not look at it. I ran screaming to the car, where my friends waited. I spooked them so badly that they all just jumped in the car, and we sped away. I heard later that the tombstone under the tree belonged to the boy who is said to still haunt the cemetery. I may still be somewhat of a skeptic, but I will never, ever go back there. In May of '99, my favorite uncle, Brian, died of cancer. It was a big surprise. He had always seemed to be so fit and healthy for his age. He was 61. The day he died was strange for me. I'd gone down to his house to see him and found his sister, my Auntie Anne, standing at the door of his house, talking to one of his neighbors. My mom looked worried. She had a right to. That morning, he had been taken to Worksome Hospital in North Wales, UK. He had been complaining that he had a pain in his back for months. Anyway, I didn't know what was going on until I walked closer to my mom and her sister, talking about what happened to my Uncle Brian. It was then when I could smell it. The terrible smell of death looming over the house. I've read and heard of people smelling when death is coming, and had never believed it before, but I knew now that it was true. We visited the hospital, and I sat watching my limp, pale uncle's body disintegrate into nothing. And that was a very sad day for me, and will always be embedded into my mind. As we all sat around his bed, my mother asked me what I wanted to do. In my heart of hearts, I wanted to stay by his side, but couldn't bring myself to watch him go. I decided to go home. As we arrived home, and I put my key in the front door, I could smell a faint smell of something. I knew that it was the same smell I had smelled in Uncle Brian's. At that moment, I burst into tears. Just as I did, the telephone rang. It was Brian's son, Mike. Before anyone picked up the phone, I told him that he had died. Mom picked up the phone, and sure enough, my favorite uncle had died, minutes before we entered our own house. That is no ghost story, but this is. My Uncle Brian used to stay with us all the time for the holidays, Christmas and Easter, and sometimes birthdays. We had a dartboard put up under my room in the dining room, especially for him. At night, when he was alive, we, or rather I, could hear the darts hitting the board with such force that he used to run right through the floor of my room. He used to stay up till late at night too, watching the telly and switching channels on cable TV. After he died, however, that all stopped. Christmas was as quiet as a mouse. There was no telly, no darts hitting the wall or the dartboard, nothing, just complete silence. That was until New Year. As soon as it turned 2000, the noises started again. One night, I couldn't sleep and thought I heard someone moving about downstairs. I thought it was my dad, who suffered 7 heart attacks. I walked over to my door and opened it a little to listen to what was going on down there. As I listened, I felt a chill run up and down my spine. I could hear the telly. I felt curious, so I made my way down the stairs. As I got to the living room, I found myself staring at a telly that wasn't even on, that hadn't been on for hours. I shrugged and told myself that it was probably next door. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard what I thought was someone playing darts. I turned on my heel and walked downstairs, again curious to find out who was making these noises. I got to the games room and looked at the darts board. Its doors were closed and locked. No one could have played with that if they wanted to, without whacking my father up for the key first. For the record, my uncle loved his tea. His cup was still hanging up on the mug tree. As I had gone back upstairs for the second time, I'd seen it with my own eyes, hanging there, still and alone. I got to my room and went to sleep, finally. But I had only been asleep about 15 minutes when my older sister, Rebecca, was waking me up. She looked terrified. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me the following creepy tale. She was in her room, laying in her bed, ready to fall asleep, when she just happened to look at the bottom of her bed. That's when she saw him. My Uncle Brian stood there in all his glory. He was holding his mug in his right hand and was staring at her. She couldn't move a muscle. It took her all her time to make it out of her room to my room. By this time, she was crying her eyes out. I don't know what it was that made me do the thing I did next, but I felt I had to check that this mug was still hanging up on the mug tree like it was about 25 minutes ago. With my sister holding onto my hand so tight, we made it to the kitchen. His mug was not there. I went into the living room and found a still warm cup sitting on the table, half full of steaming tea. To this day, he still plays darts and visits my sister's room. Maybe he wasn't meant to leave us as soon as he did. Back in 1990, I was 18 years old and staying with the host family in Veracruz, Mexico, as an exchange student. One day, I awoke to a lot of bustling and nervous chatter around the household. I kept hearing the word Baruja repeated over and over. Unfamiliar with that word, I inquired about its meaning, which was explained to mean witchcraft in Spanish. Apparently, someone found a cross, laid down in granulated salt in the backyard, which according to the native residents was a clear sign of witchcraft. Being the consummate skeptic, I just nodded and secretly chuckled at the genuine worry that this superstition was creating. Later that evening, the day's excitement culminated into a sort of ghost story session in the kitchen area, where it was explained to me that witches and spirits have been known to travel in shadows or balls of light. Whatever happened to the broomstick, I belted as I laughed out loud. After a few more stories, I had heard enough and decided to show them just what I thought of their primitive beliefs. I ran out the back door and approached the cross of salt that started this whole charade as the group clamored after me. I stood above the cross and made a challenge. I said out loud, I challenge the spirits of hell to damn harm me. Anyway, they all thought I was taking a big risk, but I just laughed it off. Later that night, my host brother and I were dropping off friends with the family flatbed. As the last one jumped out from the rear, I turned my head and watched him enter his household. Before I turned my head back to a frontal view, the next image we saw both startled the both of us. Materializing from the upper window, there seemed to be an entity of some sort. It was an old lady, but a really disfigured looking old lady. You could see the detail in her face, but she had red glowing eyes at the same time. Besides the red glowing eyes, she had scars all over her face, and it looked like she was almost on fire at the same time. I don't even know how to describe it, but it looked very off-putting. The image of this witch lasted about 30 seconds before she dematerialized, and she was no more. Naturally, we bailed out of that area without really processing what we had seen. After what I just witnessed, I knew I felt a sense of regret. It was then when I realized that I should never make demands or challenge Satan himself to come see me. So, I'm not sure entirely if that was Satan himself coming to see me, but I know that it was something serious, and I didn't want to mess with it. Demonic. Challenging the spirits to come see me. I guess that was a horrible idea. And now I'm no longer a skeptic. I'm a little bit more open-minded now. But I guess you can understand after dealing with that kind of thing. So what's the big takeaway from here? Obviously, you don't want to challenge the devil. You don't want to summon anyone, because you never know what you may be conjuring up. I know this all sounds silly, but it's true. It happened, and I just wanted to tell my story. My first ghost story experience started happening to me about 2 days after my mom and stepdad bought this house. We have a child-proof door to keep my little sister and the dogs from going downstairs. It only comes to about 3 feet high, and it can be opened from the other side. Since we had just moved in, and hadn't got any of the bedroom furniture into the house yet, I'd slept out on a cot in our living room, where you can see the child-proof door that leads to the staircase. Anyway, as soon as I drifted off, I felt as though someone was watching me, and so I rolled over to face the door, only to discover what seemed to be a solid shadow, with one arm over the door and head peering over at me. It soon disappeared, and since it was dark, I just convinced myself that my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I went back to sleep. But it kept happening, and my mother soon started telling me she's seen it too, wherever she goes to get some water or go to the bathroom, and I hadn't told her I'd seen anything. We could both swear to God that there's someone there looking at us. Then after we finally got settled in, I started sleeping in my room instead of the living room. Since I can't sleep without a little light, and my bedroom is in the basement, I have a dull green light in my walk-in closet, which you can clearly see into from my bed. So one night, I'd been reading my book, and over the top of my book, I saw a solid shadowy figure in the shape of a man just walk through my closet. I was so scared, I ran upstairs as fast as I could. My mom and stepdad came out and asked me what was wrong, and so I told them. They looked irritated and said that it was just my imagination and I should go back downstairs and get some sleep. So I did, until 1:30 in the morning. I woke up because I heard someone calling my name, and I thought maybe it was time to go to school. Then when I was fully awake, I realized school wouldn't start for another week, and that the voice was calling my name, and it was unfamiliar to me. So I froze in my bed, but I kept hearing my name, until it was like a whisper in my ear, and I felt something that was almost like a cold finger running down my back. I almost ran back upstairs to wake my parents again, but remember what the reaction had been the last time, and decided that maybe, if I just laid in bed, it would go away. Then the TV turned on to channel 60. At the time we didn't have cable, and on the TV was a televised ad about contacting the dead. that it shut off. I screamed and ran up the stairs as fast as I could and slept on the couch for the rest of the night. To this day, I refuse to sleep downstairs, no matter how childish it may sound. Also, another thing that has happened to me for a long time, I was definitely afraid that the lights in my room would go off and my door would slam shut so I couldn't get out. And one night, when I went downstairs to get something, my door creaked and slowly started closing, and then my lights flickered. I went upstairs as fast as I could and asked everyone if the lights had flickered upstairs, and they all responded no. Various other things still happened in my house. Like one time, when I was wrapping a Christmas present, I put down the tape and went to pick it up again, and it wasn't there. I asked my mother, who was in the room with me, if she had taken it, and she said no. We searched all over the house, and finally, we found it on the kitchen counter. CD players go on and off. The dogs bark and growl randomly like there's a stranger standing right in front of them. The cat's hair stands on end, and they hiss at nothing and bolt into the other direction. And sometimes when I go downstairs to do the laundry or something, I got the sudden urge that I need to run quickly or something terrible will happen. And believe me, I do. Hello, my name is Brittany. I'm not positive how my story will be accepted, but a few things that have happened to me are something to consider. There are 3 parts to my story. The first part is my parents' personal encounters. The second part is an encounter my parents and I both shared. And the third is my own personal encounters. Part 1, the noisy spirit. When my parents first bought out the house, it was very small. Only a kitchen, dining room, and living room. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. My parents had been inspecting every room one at a time to see exactly what they needed to fix up. My parents were upstairs in one of the bedrooms when they heard noises downstairs in the kitchen. When they got downstairs, according to their story, to investigate, the cupboard doors were swinging back and forth wildly. They walked over to shut them, and voices yelled at them to just leave immediately. They didn't listen. 5 years later, I was born. By then, they had built on 2 family rooms, 2 porches, a laundry room, pantry, and they even built on a shop where they conducted their own business. They normally heard music playing and voices yelling at them, but they ignored it for whatever reason. In the second story, the attacks, when I was 10 years old, a lot of very dangerous attacks started happening. My dad started being ferociously attacked during the night by invisible forces. Now, my dad slept upstairs in his bedroom alone because the bed hurt my mom's back, so she always slept downstairs on the couch. My bedroom is directly beside theirs, so I could hear everything going on in there. Normally, my dad will wake up to feel as if he was being held down, strangled, bit, scratched, cut with a knife, carried around the room, etc. When he would wake up in the morning, he would have bite marks in impossible places on his body, cuts, scratches, red bruises around his neck and wrists, and long deep gashes across his chest. Now, this didn't happen all the time, all in one night, but things happen frequently. I was really starting to get worried. My grandma and Aunt Phil taught me an Italian prayer to keep the evil away. I would pronounce it right now, but I'm not entirely sure if I even did it right, so I'll refrain from doing so right now. But the prayer is the prayer to the Virgin Mary, and its purpose is to keep all the evil out. They told me to say that 3 times every night, and it would keep the evil out. I said it 3 times in dedication to my father, and things slowly started to get better. It was still very scary, because I never expected the entities to be so violent. But in my 3rd paranormal experience, these are my personal encounters. Well, now that I'm 16, certain things have happened to me. They aren't violent or even frightening, more so reassuring. To explain it a bit, My bedroom door is the kind of door that unless you prop it open, it swings shut again. And fast, too. Well, for the past year and a couple months, I've noticed that there might be a spirit that is checking in on me. When I sleep, or late at night, my door will swing open, wide enough for a head to look in, to check in on me, to make sure I'm okay. I'll look because it creaks, and see nothing there. It will stay open at that width for 2 minutes, as if someone is checking in on me. Then it will slowly shut, the doorknob will turn, and it will close all the way. Like I said, it was reassuring, because I felt as if someone, whoever it was checking in on me to make sure I'm okay, and they're just trying to tell me they're here for me. I'm glad I have it. I look at it as my spirit guide. I'm pagan, so on my website, you will understand my belief as spirit guides. I'm 19 years old, work in the computer industry in London, England. When I was around 10 or 11, I used to live in another part of the county, called Dudley, West Midlands. Opposite our house was a pub called the Hangman's Tree. We found out later that this pub was where people in the late 18th century hung people for crimes, such as highway robbery, murder, etc. Anyways, my sister was about 7 or 8, but didn't like the dark, so she always used to call Mom to take her to the toilet in the night. One night, my mom heard my sister go to the bathroom on her own. In the morning she said, "Well done, you went to the bathroom on your own last night." My sister replied, "No, I didn't, Mommy. The black man took me." My mom panicked at this point and thought someone must have gotten into the house. She said, "What black man are you talking about?" My sister said, "He's my friend. He's a black mist, and he sits with me at night and tells me stories." We're all getting really scared now. My mom asked me how she knew it was a black man, because when he smiles, I can see his teeth. We were all really freaked out by this, but my sister didn't really seem all that bothered by it. So we decided, whatever it was friendly. A couple of weeks later, I walked into my sister's room to check on her, and found that the rocking chair in the corner of the room was rocking on its own, and at a steady pace, and my sister was fast asleep. I don't know. It may be a comforting presence, but it definitely seems creepy to me. My name is Alex, and I live in Colorado. I've always been in tune with the supernatural. My first experience that I can remember was at my grandmother's house, and I think I was about 5 years old. My grandfather had died long before I was born, and when my mother was about 6 months old, I remember him coming into my room and telling me goodnight, and that he loved me, and telling us a bedtime story of the 3 bears. I asked my grandmother who the man was, and she said no one was in the house but her, my mother, my brother, and I. I told her the man's name, and she laughed, and said my mother probably told me to tell her this. I said my mother was asleep, and was about 20 feet from me, in another room, and I don't think she could have heard him. Granny said that was true, and she called my mother in, and said, "Hey Jackie, did you tell him about Pat?" My mother said no, that she didn't remember him himself. My grandmother asked me to describe the man to her. I said he was about 6 feet tall and wiry, with brown hair and blue eyes, and he could imitate different accents. He told me in an English accent that he loved me, and in a thick Irish accent goodnight. Then he told me the whole story of the 3 bears in a very English accent. He didn't seem like a ghost at all. He seemed completely real to me. She said I described my dead grandfather down to a T. I've never seen my grandfather's picture before, and my grandmother told me so. My grandmother is very open-minded, but the rest of my family is not. She got tears in her eyes, and she took me in her lap. She said, "Patrick, "Do you know anything about your family history?" I said no. She said, "You hail from a long line of very powerful people." She said that our family was old and went all the way back to England, Ireland, and even Scotland. Back before the Christians and the Muslims, and back into time immemorial. She said every generation had a special ability, and so did I. My grandmother gets dreams, and they always come true. 2 years before Mount St. Helens blew its top, she told us it was going to blow. She's like that. She told me our family practiced the old religion. I said, "What? Christians?" She said no. She said Druidry and Wicca. I was like, "What's that?" And she said she'd explain it to me when I was older. She told me to tell Pat she still loved him after all these years. The following night, however, I was not greeted by the same presence as before. The really crazy thing was, it was something entirely different. That's when this entirely black figure, completely blacked and shadowed, but you could still make out the outline of this figure, walked through the doorway. His presence was obvious. He was not here to make friends, and it was apparent that it was not my grandfather. "Where's Grandpa? Where's Grandpa?" I can remember shouting, but no noise was uttered by the black figure. Just then, he pointed to the window right next to me in my bedroom. I didn't want to look, so I didn't. In fact, I refused to look. So I think I remember shutting my eyes and covering the blankets over my head, and just went on. I heard the door slam shut. The next morning, I woke up and went to greet my grandmother in her bedroom. Unfortunately, something was terribly wrong with my grandma. At the time I didn't realize it, but she had passed away in her sleep. And to this day, I really wonder if that had anything to do with my incident the night before. Was it a coincidence? I'm not entirely sure, but it devastated me for years to come. You may criticize me and say that 5-year-olds could not remember such a thing, but remember, I remembered it clearly because it was a traumatic event. My family has a history of abilities, and my grandma even talked to me about this before she passed away. I don't know, maybe it was Grandpa, and he was secretly saying that he wanted Grandma to be with him and that he missed her or something. But why did it feel so dark? Why was this presence so dark? I can only conclude that now, as I think back to it, it had to be the death, the Grim Reaper himself, and there's no other explanation for it. One thing I still wonder to this day is that the Grim Reaper was pointing at the window. Remember, from earlier in the story, I always wondered, what if I did in fact look out the window? I would have saw something bizarre. Maybe my grandma's soul being transported into a different dimension. Or maybe, just maybe, it was just all in my head. Whichever the case, it doesn't matter. It was terrifying. Well, here we go. I'm not sure if what I'm experiencing is an actual haunting, or if everything can be easily explained. I live in South Texas, not in the sticks. I'm 17 years old, and currently attend high school. I'll be graduating this year. Our house is very new. It is only 4 years old, and built by us, so nothing has happened in the house. However, we live directly on the banks of the San Antonio River. In fact, we're situated on a 75-foot cliff. On our property stands another house, where we also used to live while our house was being built. I never liked this house, and always felt very uneasy when staying there alone, or for that matter, with others in the house. I do not know exactly how old this house is, but I do know now that when they were adding new boards to the siding, they found old newspapers dating back to the late 30s and early 40s in the sides of the house. Now let me explain the layout of the older house. It has one bedroom In one kitchen, there's a living room, dining room, and an entertainment area for guests. The living room used to be my room. Between the bathroom and the bedroom, there lies a closet. The closet has 2 doors, connecting both rooms together. I always felt as if something was watching me from everywhere in the house, but never really experienced anything. Now that we have moved into our new house, things have intensified. I always feel the eyes on me now, and sometimes I am forced to run downstairs because of the overwhelming sense of dread that occurs while I am upstairs alone. I hear my shower door open and close during the night, and when I am downstairs watching TV, I can hear the water running in my bathroom. When school is in session, I usually get up around 5:30 to get ready, because I'm an academic editor for the yearbook, as well as class treasurer, so I usually have to be there early, so I can get everything in order for the student body. Well, once I was taking a shower, when I felt something hit the back of my leg with extreme force. I turned to rub my leg and search for the culprit, thinking maybe I had accidentally knocked over a bottle of shampoo. Yet directly behind me was a penny. I have no idea where that could have come from. I haven't told anyone, as I think no one would believe me, and I'm more than happy to keep this to myself. Except, about 2 weeks ago, I had a dream that disturbed me greatly, and I feel someone needs to know. I had a dream that I lived in the old house on my land, and I was dressed in old style, late 30s clothing, and I was washing dishes. All of a sudden, a girl came running into the kitchen and kissed me, telling me she was on her way to an ice cream social in town, and that her boyfriend, she gave me a name, but I can't remember now, would be picking her up and taking her. She appeared to be my age now, and I'm supposing I was her mother, because I told her to take care and to wait to say goodbye to her father, something I would never say. Anyway, another girl appeared from the back, and I was now outside, standing on the porch drying my hands, and waving at a man pulling up in an old-style car, like you see in mafia movies from a long time ago. I kissed him, and he appeared to be my husband. He was explaining to me about his recent business venture, when I suddenly realized who I was. I took the man by the arms, and began to shake him uncontrollably, telling him he was crazy, because in a few months, the Great Depression would fall, and we would all starve to death. I then told him that we should save our money and move to Florida. He took a hold of me and told me that the heat must have gotten to me, kissed our 2 daughters goodbye, and took me into the house. Only we went into the bedroom and continued to walk through a second door and into a second bedroom that the house does not have today, and he laid me down on a cot. He told me to get my rest, then he kissed me on my forehead, and when I closed my eyes, I woke up in my room. It was the strangest dream I ever had, and as a result, I have not been able to sleep for days. I usually go to bed at 10, but lately I've been drifting off at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I usually dream every time, except now I don't, or do not remember when I wake up. I still feel like I am being watched, and I have no idea what is going on. If you, or anyone can shed some light on my situation, please email me. I would greatly appreciate it. I know this sounds weird, but it's very scary. I wonder if the dream has anything to do with the situation in my house. Thank you. Hey there. You've reached the end of this video, and if you are like me, then you'll probably not understand what I'm talking about. Just kidding. Well, actually, I'm not kidding, because I really don't understand what I'm saying most of the time. But I know what I'm saying now, which means comment, subscribe, share, and like this video. You can do whatever you want to the video afterwards, as long as you do something with it. Put it on your face and run around like a madman, or just become a phantom of the night. I have no idea what that means, guys, but, I was just rolling with it. It sounded good in my head, and I guess when I translated it to actual recording, It sounded like a big fat flop. Anyway, guys, hope you like this compilation of Halloween proportions. Yeah, this is a really good video, only because I say so, and, I have a high opinion of myself, so I'm arrogant, so of course, yeah, I'll think that. But you guys know what I mean. Not really, because you can't relate to someone who's arrogant. Who wants to be? I ain't got time for that. Actually, I do, because I say I do, so, if I say I'm arrogant. Anyway, guys, it doesn't matter. Pay no attention to the man who's spewing gibberish at you, like, really. But seriously, guys, comment, like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you in the video. I'll see you in the future. I'll just end this because I'm messing up so much that I don't even want to edit anything, and I feel like it's authentic. I don't know why I'm over-explaining myself. Doesn't matter, Phantom. You gotta go. Bye-bye. Love you guys. Always and forever. Signing out.